Great. So welcome everyone today. Our Bench to Market talk today is going to be about building a compelling pitch, communicating your go-to-market strategy with Keyton Weissinger and Brian Walsh. As a reminder, this talk series is co-sponsored by our program Biolocity, as well as Georgia CTSA and the Petit Institute for Bioengineering and Bioscience. So as a reminder, Biolocity offers commercialization resources such as legal office hours. You're free to sign up for an hour with Professor Nicole Morris to talk about various legal questions that you might have as an early stage entrepreneur. You can check out that link on our website and sign up for a time there. You can also sign up for time for pro bono office hours with our team. These are technology consultations. It doesn't have to be a technology that is, ready for prime time, ready for our funding cycle. If you've got an early stage idea and you want to bounce ideas off of us, you're always welcome to sign up for a meeting with our team, and we can help start brainstorming with you and kind of put together your story. One opportunity in the near future that I wanted to highlight is BARDA. As some of you might know, we're part of the BARDA Drive Accelerator Network. BARDA is a government agency that broadly funds technologies that have a tie to health security, but they publish specific areas of interest on their website, and they have non-dilutive funding opportunities that can actually get early stage companies pretty far. They're going to be coming to Atlanta as part of the Resi conference, so we're having a sort of side-along event on March 26th. That's next Tuesday. There's going to be a plenary session where they'll go over funding opportunities through BARDA, and then you can also sign up for one-to-one meetings actually using this QR code there. So I'll give folks a couple seconds if you wanted to scan that QR code. You can also find links to this on our social media. I think there are still a few one-on-one sessions available for Tuesday's meeting. And then one of our partner organizations is Lab to Launch. This is over at Emory. This is a wet lab incubator space for early stage biotech startups. If you're interested in and you think your company is at a good stage for this, feel free to email labtolaunch@emory.edu, and those folks will get in touch with you about what the application process looks like. Keep an eye out for our next webinar in the Bench to Market series. This is going to be opportunities through contract research organizations, or CROs. We're going to have panelists from both the CRO world as well as some entrepreneurs who have worked with CROs too. And so you can see kind of what it would look like to outsource some of your research and accelerate your product development there. And that'll be on April 17th. So feel free to register on our website. So coming back to today's talk, like I said, this is all about how to build a compelling pitch. Our speakers today are two folks who are very experienced in giving compelling pitches and have had repeated success in this area. First is Brian Walsh, with several decades of experience in medical device management and a close entrepreneur in residence with the Biolocity program. Some of you might know him from some of our technology consultations. Our second panelist is Keyton Weissinger. He's the Chief Operating Officer of Copian Health. And a serial entrepreneur himself. He also works very closely with our team, especially on digital health projects. So I'm really excited about this talk. It's always a fun one. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and stop my share, and Keyton and Brian, you can get started.
Thank you, John. I will. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for taking time today. I really appreciate it. We're going to talk a little bit. So we're going to be talking about two different aspects of the pitch process. So I'll talk about giving a pitch, kind of talking about some of this is blocking and tackling and, mom and apple pie, sort of how to engage an audience about investment and how to get your idea across. And get some information back. And then Brian will talk a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of really getting into the planning and development stage of that sort of as a second part of that pitch. So I'm going to be talking very high level about sort of getting an idea across and things like that. I've done a lot of pitches, and then Brian will get into a little bit more detail of some of this. First and foremost, I want to thank JCK at Atlanta Tech Village here in town. JC does a pitch practice. Anyone is welcome to come. It's at 1 p.m. on Fridays. And it is at Atlanta Tech Village, where our company, Copian Health, has office space. So one last thing, a warning about loud colors. This is a very, very colorful presentation, as you'll see in a moment. So let's get going. So you have a thing around which you want to start a company. You have a project or et cetera, and a lot of that is going to start with looking for some level of investment, right? And that investment may be time. It might just be I want to get some questions answered. I want to be introduced to folks and things like that. But it might be money, and eventually it will always be money, right? So this will start with a pitch, and that's what I'll start with was exactly how to get into that. So specifically, I'm going to be talking about early pitching, often in a group of other people pitching. A lot of these things happen at events. So you're maybe one of 10. Is it best to be first? Is it best to be last? That sort of thing. Um, and this is a 10-minute pitch, right? So this is very specifically, you have a very specific amount of time to share your idea and your ask with a group of people, typically investors and other entrepreneurs. And how do you want to use that time as effectively as you can, especially if you're in a group of people and you want to kind of be remembered? Okay. All right. So as you get further on, there are other types of pitches which can, specifically further into your life cycle. You'll need to provide a lot more in-depth information. It's longer, it's one-on-one, et cetera. And that's not what this one is about. That could be a presentation all by itself. Okay. All right. So slide one, I warned you about the colors. Okay. So our goal in this pitch is you want to tell a story that's going to be remembered. Okay. And as part of that, you want to make it simple to remember. You want it to, everyone understands exactly what you're talking about. You want to enunciate clearly all of those things, engage. You want to, in your very first slide, there are two things that you want to get across: who you are and what your company is. Okay. You want to keep it to first names. If you can, only have one person speak as opposed to two people, because now I have to remember two people, right? So one person, very specific, keep it engaged, sort of talk clearly, etc. Right? They have to be interested in hearing it from you before they're interested in hearing about whatever it is you're talking about. Right. So the next is about your company. If it's hard to say, figure out some way to get it across. Wear your logo on your shirt, something. It is important for them to remember what that is. In this slide, in this sort of intro slide, you want to make sure that they know the name of your company so they can come back. And I'll show an example of this in just a moment. But they want to know about you, but they also want to know about your company and why they should care and kind of what they do. A couple of things, kind of again, blocking and tackling. Make sure your company name is on every slide, right? If you must have a catchy slogan, have it on the first slide. But again, make sure that catchy slogan actually captures what you do. But make sure, it's addressed in what you're actually about to pitch. So, you don't want to say, you don't want to have a slogan that does this, and then you're going to talk about this. That's no good. Okay. All right. So here's an example. Oops. All right. So this is one of our early pitch decks from Copian Health. So, hi, my name is Keyton Weissinger. I'm with Copian Health. We're all about faster, easier OR growth. Okay. So if you notice, my name and logo on there. The name is is on every slide. It's in here. I have a slogan that's very simple. We're talking about growing operating room utilization. Okay. You know who I am, you know what I'm here, and you know what I'm going to talk about. Our next goal is why. Now, this is not about what you do. This is about the problem. I don't want to actually put anything in your mind about us at this time. What I want to put in your mind right now is that this problem that we are solving is real, and it is one that our target audience has, and it's something that is meaningful to them. Okay. And that can be very, very specific. And especially when you're talking about, devices or pharma and that sort of thing, you're going to need to get very specific for exactly what problem you're trying to solve. Okay. This is the why, right? So in our case, operating rooms. 68% of revenue and 60% operating margin, right? If your operating rooms are highly utilized, you make money. If you don't, you lose money. Operating rooms, and this is an example of part of the pitching process. I'm going to talk a little bit about this on this slide that has nothing to do that is not covered on the slide. If you'll notice, I've got a very simple problem statement, right? Operating rooms are the revenue and they sit idle. Okay. And I want you to sort of stew on that while I'm giving you some facts. Things like we're about generating, we're talking about margin. We're not talking about revenue. We're talking about the fact that, give you little facts. And in my case, a minute of operating room time is $42 a minute. You start sort of, getting into there. I want you to understand that there is a problem here to be solved. But again, very simple. There's not a lot here to read. I don't have 50 bullets, right? A couple of things to note here, and they're subtle but kind of important. On the bottom left, I've got copyright doesn't matter, but my name does. And I want them to be able to look down at any time because eventually you're going to have one investor go, oh, wait, operating rooms, I care. Hold on a minute. Oh, yeah, copy and help. Right. Every slide. The note here about where I got this information, I want them to know that I'm not just spouting stuff. I'm coming with some information. Okay. All right. Okay. This is the next statement. You've now set the stage for the problem being solved. And now is your chance to talk about your solution. Again, this whole thing is 10 minutes. So you're moving kind of quick, but you've set the stage for the problem. And now you want to get to the solution. This first comment here, don't get caught in the weeds. Critical, right? Because a lot of people, especially from an academic background, they understand this. They really are into this. This is what they do every day. They are deep in the weeds of this really hard problem to solve. They've maybe spent years thinking about that. The investors don't care, right? They want to understand your solution to the problem as quickly as you can and very specific. Okay, so you're looking at a very high level. Remember, you love your startup, you live it every day. The investor don't, right? Otherwise, they'd be competitors, right? I think JC's comment here at the bottom is fantastic. What is the spectrum of pain of the problem you're solving, right? Is it oxygen or is it Chanel number 5? And that is a great way to think about that. I want to get across the level of solution that I'm trying to, the level of problem I'm trying to solve, and my solution is sort of on solves that level of pain. Okay. So again, this is all part of a story. I've told you who I am. I've told you what my company is. I've told you what the problem is. Now I'm going to talk about solution. And again, high level. I don't have a lot of graphs. As anyone in the room can probably knows, there's a lot that can be said about machine learning, artificial intelligence, generative AI, et cetera. The investors don't care. What they care about is that you are applying a technology or a solution to the problem you just set. So I'm going to talk about in this slide, I'm going to talk about how we are using the power of machine learning to predict utilization of hospitals, to be able to capture that unused time and get it into the hands of people who can use it. And again, we're talking about contribution margin. Now, there's a couple of subtle things that are going on here, and you want to try and get some of that subtlety in your presentations, right? One of them is we are talking about at a high level what we're talking about. I'm not talking about, gradient boosting, linear, blah, blah. They don't care, right? Machine learning, right? Also, too, especially in healthcare, understanding how they see the business of their solutions, the customer, we'll talk more about that in a minute, indicating that you understand that is going to be very helpful for your investors to know that you've done your homework, you understand the space. And in this case, it's this second line, this improved contribution margin. It's not that big a deal. It's not even that big a part of the solution. What that indicates, though, is I understand how hospitals do business. And remember, this is all about the business. So if there's a way that you can get that across, it's very important. And it might be specific to your type of customer. Okay. So every slide's doing a little bit of double duty, but that is an example of this one. So again, high level, right? You're talking about solving the problem you just stated, and you want to get across maybe a little bit more information if you can. All right. Now, at this point, you want to maybe, at this point, people are beginning to think, okay, I understand the problem. You're doing something. Is this affordable? Right. And then you're able to actually give just a little bit of information at a very high level of of how your solution is doing. Right. And this is basically all about sort of a precursor of later conversation about how you are being compensated, how you're going to charge, who's going to pay. And this is okay, look, if we can just get one more hour of recaptured time, I'm going to get a 4x ROI. That does a couple of things. One, it calms the investor down to go, okay, well, this is a super expensive problem to solve, otherwise they'd solve it. Or or it again kind of does double duty because I am talking about that contribution margin, how hospitals think about their ORs. So again, I need to be aware that I need to show that I'm thinking about my customers and their relationship with the problem, and not just my relation to the problem. Because I could be an academician who has done a huge amount of work. I am the world's leading expert at X, but unless the person on the other end understands that connection to their business, it doesn't matter. And then success metrics. I've now just said, I've made a big claim, solution. How are we doing? And this is where, if you have information to share about your solution, um, it's important to get it across. And again, very simple, right? So I got three numbers here. Any of those numbers are important and very useful for anyone who's sort of aware of the space. Again, this is showing that I understand how my client thinks, but more importantly, it also makes it very clear that I am measuring the success of my solution against the problem, and I'm demonstrating that success. All right. So the individual details are going to be different for every startup, obviously. Okay. Last but not least, who pays you and who are your competitors? So your customer and your competition. And again, very, very high level. This is going to be, sort of the wordy slide. Here's a couple of things to think about on this slide. Are you competing with an 800-pound gorilla? If so, who are they and why are you better? Why are you able to get in there? So for us, complex versus academic, these, very high end, whereas, okay, we're good for a surgery center. That may not work for you. But what I'm talking about is I understand the landscape of there is competitors. Now, one of the rookie mistakes is not talking about your competitors, or worse, not knowing about your competitors. You don't want to, use up all your time thinking about competition and keeping up with the Joneses, but you definitely want to know who they are, and you want those investors to know that you know who they are. All right. All right. Next is why you. And this is not specific, but it is an opportunity if it makes sense for you, right? So you want to get across, why do they care about you? And in our case, we've had two successful exits, and two companies that did very well that had exits. And then we could talk about that. This is all about, okay, I know the problem now. I know who you are. I know the company name. I know the problem. I know the solution. I know that you've actually had some success solving it with your solution. I now know who the competitors are. Okay, talk a little bit more about who you've got helping you, right? And why I should invest in them. Okay, I know the problem, etc. All right, and last but not least in this process is, what is the ask? And you should always have one, right? At the end of a pitch, maybe it's the next meeting, maybe it's money. So we want, at this point, this was in 2022, we were looking to close our Series A, and we ended up doing exactly what's on the screen, or Series B in this case. And we can say very explicitly, here's what we're looking for. Now, it could very well be, I'm looking for contacts. I'm wanting to do more customer discovery, whatever that is, be explicit. and be direct. Um, you've already laid out that this is a serious problem. You've laid out that you know the solution. You've laid out who you are. Don't be afraid to ask a very specific question of what, because that's what they want to know. What do you want? Okay, I think, yeah. All right. So that concludes the pitch piece of this. And this is, again, this is the 10-minute pitch. You are going to a group of pitches. If you think about it, every slide had my name on it. Every slide, sort of again draws back to what we do. And the goal here is for them to remember me out of maybe 10 other pitches. If you have other information, maybe this is, a place to put on your screen, your contact information again, which I have at a slide that's not in the deck, or potentially a link somewhere for more information. Again, you would prefer them to talk to you rather than just go to a website if possible, those sorts of things. But this concludes the pitch piece of this. And at the end of Brian's talk, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but this is the pitch piece. All right. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Brian, who's going to talk about development and planning. Brian, take it away.
Yeah, so thanks, Keaton. And I have to say my slides are not nearly as festive as Keaton's. So sorry about that. Um, so what I want to do is talk a little bit about some of the expectations from both the investor's perspective of what should be in your deck. Because they see, as you can imagine, tons and tons and tons of decks, right? And they have certain expectations. And we're in a medical technology space. That's what Biolocity does. And so the vernacular, the milestones are kind of it's assumed you know what they are, and the investors are definitely know what they are. So if you don't talk about them or don't talk about them in a way that makes sense to them, you're not going to get a whole lot of traction. So if you could advance the slide, please. So first, let's talk about kind of what we know. So, from an academic perspective, we have a different way of doing things, right? You want to maximize understandings of a phenomenon, emphasize creation of knowledge. What is it? How does it work? Why does it work? Um, Decisions are made through consensus building. And at the end of it, you may write a paper or something, right? So you do all the work and then you document what kind you found at the end, right? And so this body of knowledge is created. This is a very different approach than a business setting. Could you have the next slide, please? So on the next slide, yeah, industry is very time and milestone based. Lots of go, no go decision making. You're trying to get to market as quickly as possible. You want to get to market using the least amount of money, and you're trying to mitigate risk, right? Um, but in this process, you document everything before you start. So you say, what are the user needs for this thing I'm going to create? What are the specifications? All of that is done on the front side, and you lay out your plan on a forward-looking basis. So hopefully I can give you some ideas of what that plan should look like. So let's go ahead, please. So this is a really important slide to understand. And I borrowed this from Shauna Corey, who used to work with Biolocity. The red line on the top is risk. So when you start at the very beginning, you've not mitigated any risks, right? You have the most risk you can have. And you haven't spent any money either. So the cost line's at the bottom. But the important part to understand is the value you're creating is a step function. You don't get any credit for the work or the effort or trying hard. You only get credit kind of from the investment community if you achieve a milestone. And if you achieve a milestone, the value for your technology jumps up a step, right? So you might hit first in man study. And all of a sudden, wow, that's a lot, that's investable. And the form of investment you'll get is usually to a milestone. So, the form is I need X number of dollars to achieve something. Um, and that's what these little step functions are. If you don't make it to that step function, nobody cares, right? The investors are like, okay, so you worked really hard, you tried really hard, but you didn't get there. So you always think about this in terms of steps. Should you go ahead, please? So I want to talk a second about Gantt charts. You don't have to use them, but the general format is important. And many of you probably know what these are, but these are tables that give you a visual assessment of a plan. You can see very easily dependencies. You can find critical path. And you're able to lay out all your resources. So it's a great planning tool. It helps avoid missing things, and it does tie to budgeting. But investors expect some form of this to be included in your presentation. Usually it's a single slide at the end. There may be more to it when you get deeper into more sophisticated presentations, or you have a data room. You may have very detailed ones. So I'll show you what these look like. Should go ahead, please. So this is a Gantt chart, and this one is this is for a device. And so what you can see across the top, for instance, the testing setup for verification has a bunch of subtasks underneath it. You also could have, next to that, the resource that is doing it, but it lays out things in time. And time is really important to your investors because they're going to have expectations as to when they get paid back and they exit or whatever your milestones are. So this is what one might look like. And across the top, it has dates and it has tasks on the left. Should you go ahead? So this part is also important. What Keyton works on isn't as much in a regulated space, but for a lot of the technologies that Biolocity sees, these are going to be regulated products, which means the FDA has a way you must do things. You don't get to cheat on this, and you're going to be audited against this. And a lot of the documentation you submit to the FDA is around these prescriptive approaches. So if it's a device or software, you're going to have a classification, little predicate devices if it's class 2 or class 1. You are going to look at things like FDA guidances, which are formal documents the FDA writes and has on their website, and they have them in specific areas. So if you're building a laser, for example, there'll be a guidance document on how to test a laser and what specifications you need to report to the FDA. There also may be things like ISO standards or ASTM standards and other standards. Bench testing is oftentimes required, like in imaging space. You'll have a number of phantoms and bench tests in addition to doing maybe human testing. And then there's accepted animal models. One of the things that you do want to use is models that the FDA has seen before. So if you're doing cardiac, which typically is pigs, you don't want to be doing sheep or something unless there's a really good reason for it, because then you'll have to prove that your model also is reasonable to the FDA. So you have to prove the model first before you actually prove your product or technology using the model. You really don't want to get into that world if you can avoid it. In drug and biologic, these are typically the steps you go through. You accepted small animals, moving to large animals, something on formulation. Can you scale this and build it manufacture it at volume? And then there's the safety, efficacy, and dose, which are class 1, class 2, and class 3 clinical trials. This is a very traditional pathway that you travel when you go down this drug or biologic route. Could you go ahead, please? So for a class 2 medical device, here's an example. You might have functional proof of concept, and then one of your milestones is design freeze. Another one's completion of verification, which is actually testing. Completing a validation would be clinical trials. 510(k) clearance is actually the filing with the FDA. It's a big milestone because now it says that you can market product. And then first customers. These all could be in a very, very typical types of milestones that you would set up. Could you go ahead, please? And this is an important slide. You don't have to make it look exactly like this, but something like this is typically what investors expect to see. And so it has in this case, the milestones on the bottom. It has funding levels in the middle, and then it has quarters across the top. The little flags are the milestones, right? And so you might say, the development plan slide. In your ask, you might say, asking for $10 million to achieve FDA clearance or CE mark or to become cash flow positive, et cetera. But this is that some form of the slide should be in your presentation before your ask. Should you go ahead, please? This is what a therapeutic would look like with some proof of concept. And usually you have a whole bunch of candidates and you ultimately work your way through those until you get to a lead candidate. And that's important. So determination of the lead candidate is a major milestone. And then you have various phases that you go through, much like the devices, the therapeutics and biologics have their own set. And this is all prescribed by the FDA. So you might say, I want to get through phase 2 trials. You might not get to phase three trials. So let's go ahead, please. So this is for drug development. The important part here is to read across the bottom. And this has to do with funding. The cost to get into phase 3 trials or large pivotal trials in humans can be, $100 million or hundreds of millions of dollars. Usually, at that point, a biotech company has exited to a large pharmaceutical. So your kind of end game occurs at the end of this biotech company bid. So you might move out of the university. Emory has a great whatever, you build a company, you get some outside funding, and you start to move up this chart. But at some point you have to exit. And usually that's going to be during maybe your phase 2 trial, maybe phase 1. But phase 3 is usually too much for most biotech companies to swallow, and it gets acquired or licensed by a large pharmaceutical company. That's kind of the typical pathway. Should you go ahead? And here's what it would look like. I realize this is really small. We'll provide the deck to you as well. But this is typical milestones you would see in a Gantt chart for a therapeutic development. And you can see it has manufacturing and good manufacturing practices, milestones, and regulatory across the bottom, etc. But this is and in this case, they said who was going to do it. So they were going to do some of the stuff inside Emory, and some of it they were going to do at a clinical research organization, right? And so they've identified who does it, and some things you don't want to do inside the university, just because you may not have the right resources to be viewed as commercially viable. So you have to carefully pick which ones stay in the university and which ones go to an outside organization. Could you go ahead, please? So typical value inflection points that investors will want to see are IP, patents, completion of animal work with maybe results. Did you hit a proof of concept milestone? Did you hit design freeze? Have you completed some testing, whether that's verification testing? First in man is often a really big milestone. 510K filing with the FDA, either filed or cleared, or an IDE or an IND pre-meeting and filed, or first commercial sales. These are really typical milestones. So you want to work these into your thinking and into your development plans as you develop your decks, okay? And there are others, but these are kind of the really big ones that investors will look for in value. Should you go ahead? I don't know if I have any more. Questions? So that was just kind of a quick touch on sort of how to build out something that the investors expect to see, and also ties kind of to the FDA pathway. And I think Keaton and I can take some questions if you have them.
So it looks like we did have one question come in. Says, at this early stage, the Biolocity is looking for how far out on a Gantt chart or milestones should one go? What should be the time scale and scope proposed here?
So for Biolocity, we tend to focus on the duration of the program, which is about a year to 18 months, and maybe a little bit further out. But if you're going to actually pitch to investors, you'll probably want to go out further than that. You'll want to go out to hit a major milestone, which is going to be probably around, depending on what your technology is, around past design freeze, maybe to clinical trials or first in human or something like that. But you want to be able to give kind of the bigger reference. Otherwise, the investors are trying to figure out how much money you're going to need and how long is this going to take, right? And you have to get to one of those later milestones to really have a strong value inflection point and to be acquired or licensed or something. So usually it's further out. We usually, for investors, go out a couple of years.
Yep. And I'll just add to that again from, the Biolocity perspective, as you're thinking about your milestone chart for your application. That is going to be pretty specifically tied to the 12-month funding period, as Brian mentioned. But a pitch is kind of a different thing because you're trying to tell the complete story, like Keyton sort of mentioned at the beginning. So you're going to want to show, to Brian's point, what is that bigger value inflection point? What are they going to get out of this? Is it going to be proof of concept in the key animal model? Is it going to be all the way into clinical trials? What's going to be that thing that'll allow you to raise more money, or achieve some strategic partnership? So you should have kind of a few timelines, and ideally like a high level, not so detailed one that would sit in the pitch deck that would show where you get to that point. And then if someone wanted to tunnel in, then you've got the more detailed kind of Gantt style breakdown that you saw in Brian's presentation. All right, so it looks like we had something else come in chat. So this is maybe more of a discussion topic. Someone mentioned overcoming the challenge of pitching investors as a first-time CEO. Yeah, what do you guys think about that as kind of your first go around? Any advice?
Well, I'll start. I'll let Keyton, because Keyton and I have different experiences, which is probably a healthy thing. Yeah, it's hard to be the newbie. And so part of that is it's good to have advisors, or at least those around you, that kind of support you, because oftentimes first-time CEOs, you won't have the financial experience and things like that. You may have a high degree of technical experience, but you want to kind of fill out those other things by saying, here's my team. Because, part of this is they're investing in the team and they're investing in you, right? But you want to kind of build out. So something we oftentimes see with early stage startups is, it'll be a small group of one or two people, and they immediately go out and get more people like themselves with the same types of skills and background. And what you really want is something different. You'd like to have someone who has a regulatory dimension and somebody who's actually commercialized something before. And you'd like to have, a mix. So whether they're your board or they're your advisors, that's one bit of it. But there are a lot of first-time CEOs. The other thing is, and depending on what phase your company is in, you may not be the CEO always. So that changes, right? You need a different kind of CEO to have commercial production than you have like when you're at the very, very beginning. So it's not unusual for that role to change based upon the stage of the company. Now, if you're the earliest stage and you're it. But it's not unusual for, you get a little bit later, the investors come in, investors say, great, we love you. You can be on the board, but we're going to bring in somebody who's done this before to make this more investable and make this more, attractive to acquirers. And that's not unusual at all. And it's not an offense. It's what you need to do to be successful. I don't know, Keyton?
So yeah, to Brian's point, kind of coming from a different perspective, I'm more of a health IT sort of company, SaaS model, stuff like that. And in those cases, okay, you're probably going to be the CEO until you get acquired. And then maybe not after that. One of the things that I would strongly encourage is if you feel like, before you start spouting off, I'm going to go public or I'm going to do whatever, I would definitely have some of those advisors yourself before you actually go pitch yourself. If nothing else, you want to populate a board with people that are better at being your job than you are. Because you're going to want to ask them questions so you're not asking those questions of your investors. So
maybe one level deeper on that, just because I know a lot of our audience are academic innovators. This might be kind of their first foray into entrepreneurship. Some of them are probably familiar with building research plans in their own lab. It strikes me from my experience that there's a difference between writing out a plan that you might put in an R01 application or something like that versus the kinds of plans we're talking about here. So I know you two have been, more on kind of the industry and entrepreneurship side of things, but from your experience working with academic innovators, what are some common like pitfalls as you kind of think about project plans in that way that maybe our audience could get in front of?
I can start that, and then Brian can get more in depth with specifically that. One of the things we've seen at Biolocity a great deal is actually absolutely brilliant researchers really understand the depth, potentially even a physician as well. And so they've got a lot of experience in the field, et cetera. But they have never once thought about asking someone to pay for something. And that is a huge part of it. More so in the health IT space, obviously, because you're going to want to expect someone to pay something for your service as quickly as possible. In a therapeutic space, that might be a long time, and it may not be you asking for that. But to at least understand who is going to pay for what you're doing and really understand that and really push yourself to outside of that comfort zone of the research, of the academic nature of what you've been doing to date, and think about, okay, so you are going to have to sit across from the desk and say, I want X dollars for my thing. And until you understand exactly what that number is, what those people care about that are going to pay for that, and you're willing to ask that and actually talk about that very, openly and honestly, then that's going to be a big hump for you. That at a high level, that's what I would say, Brian.
Yeah, I, again, you want to get some people around you that are a little bit different. I think two of the most challenging things with regulated products, um, one's FDA and how you navigate that in a specific way and really knowing, right? Because there's a difference between, and you kind of have to realize a lot of this is credibility related. So if they're going to ask you about, your class of device or whatever that pathway is, there's a couple ways you can answer that question. You could literally say, the answer is this, it's class two, it's a traditional path, it's not de novo, blah, blah, blah. Or you could say, we have a formal opinion from a regulatory professional, and the answer is this. Or you can say, we're in the communications with the FDA, and the answer is this. And each of those has a more attractive kind of foundation because, it coming from a regulatory professional, for example, is meaningful. Or a formal letter in your data room that says, here's the formal opinion about this thing. So the regulatory is one bit. The other one is who will pay us, as Keaton said. And so understanding the reimbursement and how this is paid for, we see a lot of pitches where people say products are this type, and they're priced this way. And you need to know a little bit about what DRGs and CPT codes, maybe, or if it applies to it, if it's telemedicine, if it's a DME type technology, you need to know something about it so at least you come across as credible. But um, a lot of pricing, pricing is kind of a pitfall in the academic community because people oftentimes say this is expensive. Well, expensive is a relative term, um, and so if it's a better mousetrap, it doesn't need to be cheaper and a better mousetrap. It'll typically be more expensive. It's a better mousetrap. So there's some thoughts around that. So I would again get around, and Biolocity lets you do it because we have ERs and stuff, but you want to know all the challenging questions on the front side, so that you're not in a large public forum on stage when you get fired that question. You go like, well, I hadn't really thought about that much or looked at it. So you kind of need to, it's the things that you don't know that you don't know that are kind of the things that you want other people to spark in you. Okay. Because if you've never done it before, it's not your fault. You just never done it before. And so, and your science can be amazing, but your business model can kill you. Right. So that was a long answer, but again, I would try to get those around you of contrasting capabilities.
That's great advice. And kind of the natural follow-up is actually something that someone just popped in the Q&A here, which is any advice on where to seek advisors for first-time CEOs? How do you find these people, build your team out? And then the second part to that question is for founders who come from scientific backgrounds, do you recommend seeking an experienced CEO right upon founding, or would that person come on at a later point? Kind of a two-part but related question.
So where to
And
find
start keeping.
people? Yeah, where to find people and whether to hire a CEO to start. Um, Certainly on the health IT side, if you are not that business person, you probably want to get a business person pretty early on that's going to understand your model, your customers, et cetera, pretty early on. And you know, and you just have to be at peace with the fact that it's hard to do both. Very rarely can you pull off. But also too, investors want to see that you've built a team, right? So you've got this great idea, but they want to see that you have other people that are interested in that, and potentially people that are better at it than you are, in terms of various roles. Where to find those folks? Starting with opportunities, free opportunities like Biolocity. There's various health tech meetups here in town, and a lot of these people go to them and speak at them, in that, at least in the health IT side. Um, yeah. So Brian has a very different answers than for therapeutics, et cetera. As you want to chime in?
Yeah. Um, so the world that Keaton lives in is really high speed relative to, like, say, doing drug development. Okay. Because he'll be able to pull something off. It's not regulated. He doesn't have to have an FDA filing, right? He doesn't have to do any of those things. And so when he says out of the box, you probably need to have a good CEO, that's because he leaves the station with his feet moving pretty fast. In the therapeutic space, you can be a CEO for some period of time until you get to a place where you go, like, I need serious investment. Like maybe doing Biolocity, and sometime afterwards, it'd be fine to be a scientific academic CEO. But the challenge you're going to run into typically is around investors, right? And investors want somebody who's got a hand on the wheel, that has done it before, um, and that they can, that they can say they got this, right? That they get their board seat or whatever, and they watch, and are an observer or a participant, but they're not going to need to drive. And oftentimes they'll actually say, I got somebody. So they'll say, here's our friend Mike, who's done this before, and he's going to be your new CEO, and we'll give you $20 million, or whatever that story's going to be. That's really common, just because they're trying to protect their investment, at the same time. And I think Keaton's advice around where you find these individuals, he's right. They're all over the place. You'll meet ones through the Biolocity program that you'll meet a regulatory person. You'll say, do you want to be advisor for our company? And they put their picture on the slide, right? So you're going to meet a bunch of different resources. And so you're always networking, because, you're going to need different types of resources as you mature. Um, and presumably some of the people you bring into play will also have a network. And so, in worst case, LinkedIn is always your friend. You can do an amazingly intelligent reach out. But yeah, they're kind of everywhere. They're a little bit not fairly distributed throughout the US, right? Silicon Valley's got a ton of these people. Atlanta has a good number, but we certainly can help all teams with resources and our networks as well. I mean, your LinkedIn, you should start to think about LinkedIn on a commercial basis. Join some groups. They have, like, medical imaging groups, right? And all these different ones, and that will help you be able to reach out to different individuals. So build that network.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points, and I'll just add a couple more. As Brian said, some of your team members might start as more informal advisors, might just be going for them for even just one specific question. And then as you continue kind of developing that relationship, come back, maybe they become an SAB member, or they start meeting with you more frequently. And then as you gain more momentum in your company, that could develop into a more permanent kind of team member as you're seeking investments. So always be thinking about cultivating relationships, even if you're not thinking about that person as your eventual, CFO or whatever it might be. It's always just helpful to build out your Rolodex. And then the other point that I wanted to make, Brian and Keaton have both mentioned there might be investors that want to put in a CEO, over your existing team. The extreme version of that are what are called venture creation firms, and these are folks that their entire model is to take basically just IP, and then put an entire management team around it. And in that case, you might not even be involved in the day-to-day running of that company as the academic founder of it. That works for some people, especially those who want to continue their day job, running their lab, running their research program, knowing that there's an experienced management team developing that company. But it might not be the right fit for you if you did want to play a more active role. So it's always fair when you meet with investors, especially early stage investors, to talk about what their model is. How did they build companies? Do they take board seats? Do they put in managers typically? What is the typical check size? You're pitching to them, but it's also the beginnings of sort of an interview for fit with what you're actually looking for on your team. So don't be afraid to ask them questions as well. Okay. Any other questions for Brian and Keyton? Don't see any in the chat or in the Q&A right now. So if not, we can wrap up. Thank you again to Brian and Keyton. This was a really informative session as always. For those of you on the line who are Biolocity applicants, we'll be posting the recording of this on YouTube, so you can always refer back to it later. Feel free to shoot me an email if you've got any questions about your specific application. And otherwise, thanks again, everyone. Yeah, have a great day.